Well, hello, YouTube. It is me, Katrina, the advisor, here to chat with you again. I know it's been a minute and I look slightly different. I went and got my summertime braids, but easy peasy living for the summer, right? Well, I miss you guys. I really wanted to come back and chat with you all. Tax season was crazy. We talked about that, I think, on our last conversation. What I wanted to talk to you guys about today is a question that comes up quite a bit. I get asked this question sometimes, and then sometimes I'll just see it in chats and groups, and people are asking about if I, especially real estate investors that are thinking, if I put my properties in an LLC, I know it adds some additional protection. How many properties can I put into a single LLC? And what state should I incorporate it in? And all of these things. So, right here, right now, I'm going to answer those questions for you. I'm going to talk to you about the key things that you should be thinking about, why it's important to even consider putting a property into an LLC, and what's the best way to go about it. So, if you want to learn those things, come on the path with me. Well, so let's talk about how many properties should I place in my LLC. Well, you got to think about three key things. One is if you're I hear a lot of times where people are, and you see the ad, you all have seen the advertisements that talk about putting, setting your LLCs up in Delaware or Nevada and talking about all the benefits that are associated with it. And sometimes they're talking about tax savings that are associated with it. There are no tax savings from an LLC. Let me repeat. An LLC provides zero tax savings, okay? And we're not going to focus on taxes in this video. We're going to talk about just really what the purpose of putting your properties in the LLC, what's the purpose for that, and what's the key things to think about in doing so to make sure that you're doing it the right way. So that's what I want to focus on today. But again, I want to state LLC doesn't provide you any tax savings. It provides you liability protection. It provides, in case somebody decides to sue your LLC, it doesn't attach to your personal assets, right? So you separate your primary residence, your personal bank account. If somebody sues that LLC, they're solely suing that LLC and what that LLC holds. So then we get into the holding. What's the LLC holding, right? Do you have one property in there? Do you have five properties in there? Do you have 10 properties in there, right? So a lot of people will say get an LLC for every property. And that can be expensive, right? And sometimes it can be overkill. And sometimes you definitely need that. Let's talk about the three things that you're going to want to consider when you're thinking about how do you want to place your properties into an LLC and the best way to do it. First and foremost, I do want to talk about the when people are saying, put it in Delaware or Nevada or those or Wyoming and all of those different places. If your property sits in Cleveland, Ohio, or Detroit, Michigan, or anywhere else, you having that LLC in Delaware, Wyoming, Nevada, any of those places, the property still sits in the state that it sits in. So, whatever taxes or income reporting that's required for that state, you're still going to have to report that in the state that the property exists in. The benefit of doing those foreign LLC filings, and that's considered a foreign filing when you're filing outside of the state where the business is actually taking place. Those foreign states that people talk about all the time, the true benefit of that is because it's typically harder to find out who the owner of a property is in those states. That's it's mainly for asset protection and that way of figuring out excuse me, a privacy. It's more of a privacy concern as opposed to a savings concern or some additional. There's the real benefit is really in the privacy piece. It's harder to find out who the owner is of the property. However, that does not negate from the fact that you still have to, whatever state that property is in, you still have requirements for that because that's where it's taking up space, right? So sometimes when people are doing those, when you're going filing the foreign entities, you're kind of costing yourself more money in some instances and it just adding more complexity to things. So if that's something you choose to do, then and you have a purpose for it, Excellent. But just know that that's not something that you have to do, because really the state that the property resides in is really where the key liabilities lie and the reporting lies, right? So I won't beat a dead horse on that. That's definitely a personal preference, but truly the benefit. Sometimes I hear it being sold as this like pie in the sky type thing, and it's not necessarily that. Sometimes the bark is bigger than the bite, right? But definitely, if you got some privacy concerns, and that's an opportunity. That's an opportunity that you have there. The key thing that you want to think about, the number one thing that you want to think about when you're placing your properties in an LLC, is the equity associated with the property, right? So let's say, for example, you have three properties, one with zero equity, you have one with $100,000 in equity, and let's say you have one with $1 million in equity. You have these three properties in one LLC. Let's say that the property that has $0 in equity gets sued. Let's say somebody slips and falls or whatever, and you've got it in you've got it in this LLC combined with these other two properties that hold equity, right? So of course there's nothing to get from the property that caused the problem, that has the issue, but it's all in one thing, right? So now we can attach to the equity of those other properties because it's basically listed in under one umbrella, right? So you want to, that's one of the key things that you want to consider, is the equity associated with the properties, right? And then what goes along with that is the second thing you want to talk about, you think about, is the type of property it is, right? Is it a high risk property? Is it an area where there's a risk associated with it? Is it a low risk property, right? We're talking about how are you going to, because sometimes you can group based upon these things. Is it a high risk property? Is it a property that tends to, in an area that's going to have, and what I'm thinking about is when I'm saying high risk, sometimes you have a lot of traffic coming in and out of a property. Say you're doing a short-term rental, right? And it's not the same people coming in all the time. That creates a risk, right? So then in those instances, do you want that grouped? Right? What do you want that group with? So thinking high risk, low risk, those are categories that you can place the properties in. The states, if you have properties across multiple states, maybe it makes more sense and it's easier and more convenient to keep those properties in the state group together, right? And then the other thing that you want to think about, the type of property itself. Is it a residential versus a commercial property, right? You don't want to group those together. Commercial properties have their own set of risks, whereas residential properties have their own set of risk, and also the insurances that go along with that, right? So those are things that you want to think about. Outside of the equity, you also want to think about what we talked about: location, the risk level of the property. There was one more that I wanted to talk about as well, and that is, well, I think I covered all three: the equity, the type of rental, and the location. The one thing that I want you to be really mindful of is when you're putting properties into an LLC, you want to make sure that you're being thinking about the future as well, right? You don't want to just think about, well, right now it's a traditional rental, got a tenant in there, I'm just going to group all those properties together. I got three properties like that, I'm just going to group them all together. You want to dig a little deeper and think, what is the market doing too? Like, okay, right now this property may not have a lot of equity, but if there's a lot of new construction in the area, then we know that the values are going to be going up, right? Or if there's gentrification in the area, maybe that's going to shift the values too. So be thinking, not just in the moment, but thinking long term. And whenever you have real estate, you want to be thinking about the future. Remember, I always say it's chess, not checkers, right? You're thinking 6 moves ahead as opposed to just thinking about the move that you're about to make. And those are things that you really want to keep in mind: equity in the property, right? The type of rental that it is, figuring out what type of group setup that's going to be. And that's multiple categories, right? I just named four: high risk, low risk, residential, commercial. So those things are things that you want to consider. And then also the location of the property. Where's the and think about the location of the LLCs too, because each state has a different price for LLCs. California is really expensive for LLCs. So you want to think about the cost that's going to be associated with it in the early stages of your business. Money's not just rolling in, right? So you want to be thinking of being mindful about the cost associated with it and maintaining it. One of the next things I'm going to talk about is the maintenance of LLCs. I think a lot of times people just put them in place and set it and forget it. And that's really not the way to do it. That's really not the way to do it. There are certain things that need to happen with LLCs. Are you running minutes? Are you having your annual meetings? Are you taking the minutes from those meetings? Are you documenting those things, right? So those things come back into play if you ever need to, if you're ever trying to get funding, if you ever get audited, and those types of things. So making sure that your back end is properly set up happens in that planning stage. And that planning stage is thinking like, well, okay, I've got these 5 properties, or how am I going to, and they're in 3 different states. What's the best way for me to put these into an LLC? Sit down and write that out and book a consultation if you need assistance in doing that, because it's not something that you should be doing in your head. It's something that you should be documenting and making sure and checking the pros and the cons of those things, right? Making sure that you've thought through everything that could possibly happen. You know, we always think about, well, the good things like I'm going to cash flow this thing. I'm going to be making this amount of profits. I'm going to be doing these things. I'm going to have these tenants that are here forever, and they're going to take care of the space. We know that a lot of times our plans don't go as planned. So we have to be mindful about those things and be prepared for them, plan in the future for the things that can go wrong. Don't just think about the things when they're going right. Plan for the things when they go, plan for what, when things go wrong. If this happens, then that I need to do this. If this happens, then I need to do this. If this property gets sued, this is my $1 million property. This is my money maker. I do not need to have this associated with anything else, because it's going to have a trickle down effect. If this income stream gets cut off, I can't cut these other ones off. Right? So think in terms of that, and think about your lifestyle that's associated with it too, because that maintenance piece is going to play a part. And if you've got 50 LLCs across 50 states, that's a lot of maintenance. That's a lot of annual maintenance. That's a lot of funds going out. There's a lot of requirements that are associated with that. So you want to simplify your life, but make it also make it effective for you, right? Making sure that it's going to be beneficial for you. So thinking about cost, maintenance, and then just your ability. Do you even, is this something you even want to do? Are you going to hire somebody to do this? Is this something that you're going to manage yourself? How are you managing your portfolio, right? Because are you putting this in a trust, right? Ultimately, that's what you want to do. But the one thing that you got to do, we got to start somewhere. And starting somewhere is figuring out the best way. How many properties can you place into your LLC? How many properties should you place into your LLC? And remember the 3 key things that you want to think about: equity, type of property, and location. And then there's a small few, and everything, there's a couple things outside of that, like cost and how much time you want to put into it, just your personal freedom. Most times we go into business because we want to bring in cash flow that's more passive, that we don't have to work so hard for. We don't have to trade time for dollars. And make sure that you keep that top of mind. You don't want to start trading your time for dollars when you're doing your investment, right? You don't mind associating some time to it in the planning stage, but you don't want to have to do that ongoing maintenance where it becomes a burden. So keep that in mind. Definitely want to jump back in with you guys. Like I said, if you have questions on this subject, this is something I'm well versed in. My link's in the bio to book a time to chat, and I'll be back and talk with you guys soon. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.